Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man sara sabilihi ila yawmiddin amma ba'd. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll continue in discussing the book At-Tadhkira fi Ulum al-Hadith by Ibn Malakin rahimahullah. And in today's discussion lesson we'll be continuing that discussion regarding Anwa al-Hadith al-Da'if, discussing different types of hadith that are said to be da'if. And in the last lesson that we discussed, Hadith al-Tadlis, and went through some of the discussion relating to that particular topic. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll be discussing what author rahimahullah he mentioned next, which concerning Hadith al-Sha'th. So what he mentioned after Hadith al-Tadlis, he mentioned وَالشَّاذُ هُوَ مَا رَوَى ثِقَةً مُخَالِفًا لِرِوَاةِ النَّاسِ. So the author rahimahullah, Ibn Lakin, that he described or defined Hadith al-Sha'th by saying هُوَ مَا رَوَى الثِّقَةِ, that a hadith that is narrated by a person who is credible, trustworthy, thiqa, mukhalifan, that is in opposite, that conflicts, برواية الثقة, برواية الناس, that goes in contrary to the narration of others, of the people. So he mentioned here concerning that this matter concerning Sha'th is a hadith where there's some type of conflict or some contradiction that occurs between some of the narrators, and one of those narrators is a person who is thiqa. So a person who is thiqa, credible, trustworthy, that is contradicting others that are also thiqat, others who are also like himself thiqat. So how to navigate such a situation. So the ulama of hadith concerning this, the hadith we will be discussing concerning one, discussing what is the ta'rif, the definition of hadith al-Sha'th, linguistically and also istilahan. And then we see regarding concerning what is mentioned by the ulama of hadith, that it also fall in line with the definition given by Ibn Malakin of Hadith al-Sha'th. So as we mentioned, that one, Hadith al-Sha'th, tarif, lugatan, according to the linguistic meaning, meant concerning munfarid. So the word Sha'th is something that they meant concerning that, something that is somewhat is odd, or going concerning that something which is odd, where a single something which somewhat odd, so that which is odd, or it's going in difference. So there's some like indifference between this and other things. So that's concerning the meaning linguistically. As for the meaning istilahan, you find the ulama of hadith have given several meaning concerning hadith al-Sha'th. So there's several meaning that are mentioned regarding what is defined as hadith al-Sha'th in the ulama al-hadith. But due to this lesson being one of for beginners, we won't go through all the definition, but we'll state what is somewhat the more renowned definition of hadith al-Sha'th and discuss that. As for what is mentioned by Sha'th, of the definitions that are given, is concerning the first being concerning ما رواه ثقة مخالف لمن هو أوثق منه أو أولى منه. So concerning or من هو or من هو مقبول. So they mentioned that after the definition given by Sha'th, and this is they mentioned that هو ما رواه ثقة, that which is narrated by a narrator who said to be ثقة, مخالفا لمن هو أوثق منه, going in contrary or going in contrary, in difference to someone who's more reliable than he is, going in contrary to a narrator who's more reliable than he is. So that's the definition of what is said to be Sha'th, and that's the definition in the meaning of what is given by Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah regarding Sha'th, taken from the meaning of Imam Ash-Shafi rahimahullah, and that's the more predominant definition given by the ulama and used by the mutaakhirun of the ulama regarding hadith al-Sha'th. هو رواه ثقة مخالفا لمن هو أوثق منه أو أولى منه. So they mentioned concerning the definitions, a person who said to be ثقة, that he is contradicting another narrator but the narrator is more reliable than he is, or more suitable than he is. That's that definition that is mentioned. So they look concerning that in that scenario, you have narrators who are all said to be thiqat, but one is saying something that seems to be conflicting with those of his contemporaries. So the hadith needs to be looked at to see, did an error occur and from whom the error occur. And that the matter is somewhat odd. So that's concerning the definition concerning hadith al-thiqah that is given by some of the ulama. And this person said to be thiqah is that person whose hadith is of the extent that I mentioned concerned that with that definition, the person hadith is said to be of the category of hadith al-sahih li dhati, or hadith al-sahih li ghayri, or hadith hasan لذاتي. So that level, they all to be, those people are said to be of that level of thiqat, that the person hadith is of the degree of the level of hadith al-sahih, بذاته, by itself, hadith sahih لغيري, of a degree just below, and hadith al-hasan لذاتي, which is hadith also. So all of those fall into what is said to be thiqat according to those of that definition. The second definition that is given by hadith al-shadh is that concerning ما تفرد بروايته الراوي ليس عنده من الضبط ما يحتمل معه تفرده بذلك الرواية. So they mention concerning the meaning concerning of that, concerning تفرد الراوي, that a person, that a narrator who's also said to be thiqa, but he has mentioned something which is odd. He has mentioned something which is odd. He himself has somewhat mentioned something that is not mentioned by others. So tafarrud in the sense that he has mentioned something in the hadith that is not mentioned by others, and that is said to be tafarrud. So he's been singled out with something in the hadith that is not mentioned by others, and that is another discussion, or that is after the definition given of shadh. So with that, some of the ulama have concluded that shadh, it comprises of those two things. At times, a hadith is said to be shadh based upon there is a mukhalifa that have occurred, and that's somewhat very clear between those narrators who are said to be thiqat, that between themselves, you have one person who have mentioned something that was not mentioned by others, and going in conflict. There's a conflict between what he's saying and what the others are saying. And the other case of shadh is a case where there's no conflict, but just a person, one of the narrators who said to be thiqa, that is mentioning something that is not mentioned by others. He's saying something that is not mentioned by the others. His other colleagues or contemporaries. But also that narrator is not, he said, but not of the degree where, but that he stands on his own, that it is something that needs to be looked at. So that's concerning what is referred to as hadith shadh. So those concerning hadith shadh is of those two parts. When a narrator or thiqa contradict someone who's more suitable than himself, and second, when a narrator or thiqa that is mentioning something not mentioned by others, so it stands out. And so by that we go to concern the next matter concerning hadith shadh. So by this, that hadith shadh, that the next discussion is regarding hadith shadh of certain, that by the next discussion concerning hadith shadh by way of its ruling. So hadith shadh, that ulama mentioned, hadith shadh is one of those type of hadith that is said to be weak. So it's said to be hadith da'if. So when something is labeled as shadh, then it is considered to be that which is weak. So now ulama say hadith shadh, or this particular juz of the hadith shadh, then one knows that it is something which is dismissed and is said to be weak. And which is unacceptable. So as concerning hadith shadh, so the general thing is that hadith shadh is classed to be amongst those hadith which is said to be weak, and also not only weak of the weak, but are severe weak, where it cannot be used for anything. So there's nothing that can come to its aid, nor can it aid anything or strengthen anything, because of that level where with shadh it means that an error have occurred, that a severe error have occurred by one of the narrators making an error. And that error, then because of an error, is not something that is actually can be accepted in strengthening another hadith, or used to be strengthened by something else. So hadith shadh is said to be of a severe error or weakness in the hadith. So that's concerning the next matter regarding, as for hadith shadh, then it can occur. Where does it occur in hadith? Hadith shadh can occur in the hadith either in the isnad or in the matan. So it can occur both by way of the isnad, which is narrators, where you might find one narrator might hold a hadith to be marfu', that he goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, and another, all the hadith is mawquf, go back to sahabi. So the discussion regarding, is this particular narration one that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, or is the case that the hadith actually goes back to a sahabi? So there's a difference regarding this matter. And you have that discussion between the ulama regarding at times where, due to shadh, that a narrator who is thiqa might mention something additional, not mentioned by others, that is said to be ziyadat thiqat. Ziyadat thiqa, then also it somewhat falls into this area. So hadith ashad or shad shudud can occur in the matan, in the text of the hadith, and also in the sanad. So with this matter, the next matter concerning ashad that we mentioned, that's a hadith which is weak. And matter the ulama discussed concerning that hadith ashad, that it is an indication that a khata, that an error occurred, but by way of the thiqat. So when they're mentioning concerning the people who are said to be rawat or thiqat, it doesn't mean that a person cannot make a mistake. So you find that those that at times a narrator who is said to be thiqa, that he can make mistake. And this is an indication that a mistake have occurred by comparing his narration with others similar to him. Then one can identify that an error have occurred by one of the narrators. So it's comparing narration of one with others, with the narrators between themselves, and see if everyone is consistent in what they're saying, or if one individual somewhat have mentioned something not consistent with the others. And then that one will be flagged up and investigated thoroughly. So al-hadith shadh or shudud is where an error occur by way of a person who is said to be thiqa. Then they mentioned concerning the next matter concerning ashad, tanbih, tanbihat, things of caution or things to be aware of, that what is said to be opposite, when a hadith is said to be shadh, then that portion of hadith is rejected, and what is acceptable, then that is said to be mahfuz. So the part that is rejected is labeled as shadh, and the portion of the hadith, if it is acceptable, then that portion is said to be mahfuz. So mahfuz is the part of the hadith that is said to be acceptable, and the part which is rejected, dismissed, is referred to as shadh. So the part that is related by the person, the part that is acceptable by the person who is said to be the one who's more the suitable, the more qualified one in this scenario, then his hadith is said to be mahfuz, and the one who's said to be his part of hadith is dismissed. That's the part which is shadh. Then that part is dismissed and is referred to as shadh. You find concerning the word using the term shadh or shudud, that you find concerning that in the kalam of the a'immatul mutaqaddimin, the ulama of old, that they use this terminology qalilan. It is used in not often, is not a regular term that is used by the ulama of old, saying this hadith is shadh or the like. So this term is not a widespread term used amongst the ulama, noting that an error occurred by saying shadh. As we discussed, the more common term that is used amongst them is the word munkar or nakara. But shadh is used, but not that often. So I was mentioned that in most scenario, the term that is used is the word, even indicating matter which is shadh, they use the word nakara or munkar, even though what they intend by this may be hadith shadh. But it was also mentioned that with the ulama, it is not that term that is used most often, is rarely used, is used very in few cases. And the term that is used more often in indicating that something is said to be shadh is the term nakara or munkar. So that to be mindful regarding when one read the books of the ulama of old, that you find the word term nakara and munkar that is used more often, unless the term shadh and shudud is used amongst them. But if this so being mindful of this, and this indicate that an error have occurred. So with the hadith being shadh, the matter that relates to this and the complexity of the word shadh is that concerning that it is something that a person said to be thiqa, reliable, and of a certain standard, but he has made an error, and when the error been detected, then that error is said labeled as shadh. The next matter that we'll discuss concerning an example regarding shadh. What is an example of hadith shadh? And the hadith I will use regarding a shadh is a hadith that have several narrations, and this hadith is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Zubair, the hadith of Abdullah ibn Zubair, and the hadith is narrated by Imam Muslim and others. And this hadith it mentioned regarding concerning the hadith that is referred to as hadith of tahriq asaba fi tashahhud, is the hadith concerning moving of the finger in tashahhud. Tahriq asaba fi tashahhud. So regarding moving of the finger in the tashahhud. So this hadith is the hadith of those who narrate hadith is Abdullah ibn Zubair. And the different narration that relates to this the hadith, that we find that some narration that it only mentioned concerning two things. It mentioned pointing. So you have some narration that, especially concerning narration of Muslim and the likes, that it mentioned pointing. A second set of hadith relating to that subject, that it relates to pointing and also moving of the finger, tahriq. And then you have some narration that negates this. You have the third set of hadith relating to that same subject that remains, that this is not to be done. But we said that's not the one concerning that our discussion regarding concerning a narration concerning of the authentic books, that it mainly mention ishara, concerning the person pointing of his finger without mentioning tahriq. So the narration that mentioned about the person moving of his finger is the narration concerning of that one concerning that you have concerning narration concerning in the An-Nisa'i and others that mention concerning وَرَفَعَ أَصْبَعَهُ, that he raised his finger. فَرَأَيْتُهُ يَحَرِّكُ, so the narrator mentioned فَرَأَيْتُهُ, that I saw him يُحَرِّكُهَا يَدْعُو بِهَا, that I saw him moving it. Concerning tariq, that it was being moved while he supplicated. And that's the part concerning that we said that's narration in the Nisa'i. That's narration in the An-Nisa'i. So regarding concerning that particular, and then you have the third narration that mentioned regarding also in the Nasa'i, Ahmed, and also Abu Dawood, that also it mentioned concerning that فيه كان يشير بأصبعه, that he used to point with his finger, فإذا دعا, when he supplicated, ولا يحركها, and he did not move it. That's the third narration. But the one regarding concerning, and that one regarding that point, regarding concerning that point, as they have the discussion now, is more concerning our discussion, is regarding moving of the finger. As that part, the part concerning not moving it, that also on a discussion, but the part relating to the hadith regarding more so confirmation that he moved his finger. And that become more concerning some of the concerning that some of the those who of the Sunnah that more discuss concerning this matter regarding moving of the finger. As mentioned by Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah in his books, and of those concerning Sifatul Salat, that moving of the finger is said to be, while in tashahhud, pointing and moving the finger is said to be of the Sunnah. So I mentioned that you have different narrations. So the narration regarding moving of the finger is concerning that is this actually a part of the hadith or not? And this concerning, so you find concern of the ulama who mention regarding concerning that as for that bit, and of them, for example, of contemporary, Shaykh Al-Albani, that he affirmed concerning pointing and moving of the finger is authentic. And you find concerning of contemporary, the likes of concerning Shaykh Mu'bil ibn Hadi al-Wadi of the ulama of Yemen, rahimahullah, that he negates this. That concerning that Shaykh Mu'bil, that he is of the view concerning the part regarding moving of the finger, that narration, it is shadh, or that portion of the hadith, it is shadh, regarding the movement of the finger. And you find the likes of Ibn Khuzaymah of old and others who can also negate confirmation that moving of the finger is authentic. So you have that discussion between the ulama regarding concerning is moving of the finger in tashahhud authentic or not. And Allahu Alam, that you have discussion between the ulama of contemporaries, and Allahu Alam, that part of the hadith, as they mentioned concerning one of the narrators, who's that concerning that Zaid, or Zaida ibn Qudama, that is the only one of many, as mentioned by Shaykh Muqbil, over 14 other of his contemporaries didn't mention it except for him. So that shows that that Zaida ibn Qudama is the only one who mentioned about moving of the finger, and based upon that the ulama all at the hadith that he is the only narrator who have mentioned that, compared to the many others. So they are greater in number, equal and more, and that's all based upon that. That is addition of moving of the finger, that order to be something which is classed to be shadh and rejected. So that's concerning that discussion. Allahu alam, that view is very strong regarding that. Moving the finger is actually not authentic. And that will be classed as Sha'th or Shudhud regarding that narration of Za'idah ibn Qudama. And Allah Ta'ala alam. So that's concerning that particular matter. So that's an example concerning Ash-Shadh as one. Then also the next matter regarding concerning Ash-Shudhud, Al-Hadith, Shadh. Where can we find books of such types? Then you find concerning that, books concerning that matter, that you find in kind of somewhat of more of books specific to that particular discussion. And that topic is more so regarding ulama of contemporary time that may write books regarding hadith that are said to be Shadh. And the likes. So you might find concerning the books of old, in the books of Ilal, of Hadith, then you might find that within the discussion of Ashad being discussed within those books that point out concerning some form of defect in the Hadith, they also discuss concerning Shadh of those who have somewhat written books in particular that related to that particular discussion. There's this particular book that is said to be concerning Ziyadat Ash-Shadha fil Hadith al-Thiqat. Ziyadat Ash-Shadha fi Hadith al-Thiqat. So they discuss concerning those type of matters relating to that matter relating Hadith al-Shadh. So that's that. So with that, inshaAllah, we'll conclude regarding concerning Hadith al-Shadh. And then we discuss concerning the next Hadith that the author, rahimahullah, he mentioned, which is Hadith al-Munkar. So Hadith al-Munkar is the next type or category of Hadith that is discussed by the author, rahimahullah, who is Ibn Malak in his book At-Tazkira fil Ulum al-Hadith. So regarding concerning Hadith al-Munkar, and as you might note that the lesson concerning Tadlis and also Shadh that goes into more detail, and also Hadith al-Munkar to be discussed. These are these topics of Ilm al-Hadith that goes in, that is of the more detailed discussion, and requires the person to to master this kind of somewhat of a well-grounded knowledge of Ilm al-Hadith and passing ruling on Hadith. And these are the more detailed matter regarding Ilm al-Hadith, and being very mindful regarding how the person approach this particular topic so as to reach the proper conclusion. So the next matter that he discussed concerning Hadith al-Munkar, so linguistically concerning Hadith al-Munkar, lugatan huwa did al-ma'ruf. So Hadith al-Munkar, from word concerning nakira, means something which is detested, repugnant, and the like linguistically, and also linguistic concerning Hadith al-Munkar, meaning concerning Hadith which is did al-ma'ruf. So it is something which is opposite something which is ma'ruf, which is known and recognized. So Hadith al-Munkar will be something which is unrecognized, odd, out of place, and al-ma'ruf is something which is recognized and acknowledged. So that's concerning from the linguistic meaning of munkar and nakira. As for now, the next meaning, the second matter regarding al-munkar in the ulama al-hadith. So the word that is used between the ulama al-hadith, they will use the word munkar or nakara. Munkar and nakara are those terms that are used meaning the same. So as for istilahan, according to the ulama al-hadith, that what is intended by the word hadith al-munkar, that you find various definitions that are given. So you find several definitions that are given of the ulama of hadith. When they defined hadith munkar, they give the definition of shadh. As for those of the ulama of hadith, where they see both as being the same. So they see some who see hadith munkar is the same as saying hadith shadh. So we mentioned concerning some of the ulama that they didn't use this term often, and the term that they use more often is the word munkar, because they saw that because the word munkar for them replaced the word shadh. So both for them, the word munkar and shadh are somewhat very similar. So you find those who have the view that munkar and shadh are very similar regarding in Islam, their meaning according to the ulama of hadith. So for them, the meaning of shadh and munkar will be somewhat similar. Either mukhalafa, some form of opposition have occurred, or indifference have occurred between the narrators. And also second, that something odd is being mentioned by one of the narrator. So they call this as either munkar, and also it became known الشاذ. So you find the ulama more of the ulama mutaakhirin, that ulama more of late latter time, that they make a clear distinction between both. They make a clear distinction between hadith munkar and hadith ash-shadh. So as for concern, so said that the first meaning is istilahan in Islamic, in the hadith terminology, according to the ulama of hadith, those who hold that the first meaning of munkar is similar to that of shadh. So you'll find that, and that may be more common with the ulama of old. Of the second meaning of munkar are those who mention that وقال ما رواه ضعيف مخالفا للراوي المقبول. So they mentioned that the second meaning of al-munkar are those who state that al-munkar is where a person, a narrator who's weak. Mukhalif, he contradicts, one oppose a narrator who's thiqa, a narrator who's credible. So you find that a person who's weak, himself being weak, is now contradicting a person who's credible. Then that we refer to as munkar. And that's more so concerning, as defined by the ulama of latter times. We're all concerning that. So for them, the distinction between shadh and munkar, shadh with them will take the meaning of is a conflict between two persons who's thiqa. The one who's accepted is mahfuz, and the one who's rejected is shadh. But with shadh is a conflict between two reliable persons. And with munkar is a contradiction or opposition between a person who's weak, contradicting, opposing one who's thiqa. So for them, so that's become, so that's the distinction that they make between both, and that's go along with the ulama of mutaakhir regarding how they see and define munkar. So with munkar, they will place that it has, after condition one, the narrator is daif, and second, is contradicting a person who's thiqa, reliable. So for them, that conflict that they have to side, we use the word, they have to take from the person who's thiqa and reject what is said by the person who's weak. And the person hadith that is said to be weak is termed as munkar. Is termed as munkar. So that's concerning that matter. So as we mentioned that, there's a difference between, with those ulama, there's a difference between shadh and nakara, as we have explained. One, shudud between thiqat, munkar between reliable and daif. So the next matter regarding hadith, and again concerning that matter regarding hadith munkar, that it is, and again, errors occur, but an error occurring where the person who's weak making that error. So he's just adding to his weakness. He's adding to his weakness. As for the hukum of hadith al-munkar, then it's also classed to be hadith al-daif. Hadith munkar is said to be, or nakara, is indicating that there's a weakness in that hadith is weak, or that there's a weakness that is there, and there's also this weakness also is severe. This weakness also, because there's an akhata that is occurring from a person who's also weak. So hadith al-munkar is those hadith that are said to be very severe weak, where they cannot be used to aid another hadith, nor that weakness can be aided by others. So it is completely dismissed. It is completely dismissed. As the statement of Ahmad rahimahullah, kama qal, that according to what we can nakara abadan, that nakara is something that remains nakara forever, meaning that it cannot be used to aid or strengthen anything. So as for an example concerning a nakara, that one ulama have mentioned, that they mentioned regarding of this concerning hadith that is narrated by At-Tabarani. Hadith that is narrated by At-Tabarani في Al-Mujam Al-Kabir, where the hadith it mentioned regarding concerning that, a narrator concerning rawahu, hadith of Ibn Abbas, the hadith of Ibn Abbas رضي الله عنه, and the Prophet Islam قال من أقام الصلاة, the one who established salat, وآت الزكاة, and give the zakat, وحج, and perform hajj, وصام, and perform Siyam. وقرأ الضيف. And he treats his guests well. دخل الجنة. He will enter al-Jannah. As we mentioned hadith in the At-Tabarani. So this hadith of Ibn Abbas, that you find that it mentioned, as we mentioned, the meaning of the hadith, that you find concerning what narrators Hubaybib ibn Habib. Hubaybib ibn Habib, he himself narrated an Ishaq, Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i, till the end of the hadith. But this person, Hubaybib, that you find many others that concern of his contemporary, that he himself is weak. And this narration also is narrated by Ma'mar ibn Rashid, Ammar ibn Ruzayq, that they narrated an Abi Ishaq, and Irzar, and Ibn Abbas mawqufan. So you find that some narration mention a hadith of Ma'mar ibn Rashid or Ammar ibn Ruzayq, that they mention this hadith going back to Ibn Abbas. And the narration of Hubaybib, it narrate the hadith going back to the Prophet ﷺ. So one who narrates back to the statement of Ibn Abbas, and that narration of Hubayb that goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, it is da'if, as mentioned by Abu Zur'a, that is mentioned, هذا hadith munkar, إنما هو and Ibn Abbas mawqufan. So the hadith is mawquf and Ibn Abbas, as mentioned by Abu Zur'a al-Razi, rahimahullah, one of the kibar ulama of hadith. So it shows concerning that it is said to be munkar, as that person is da'if, who's contradicting others who are thiqat. So the hadith is said to be da'if. Again, the last matter regarding sources, again, the books of ilal. You might find that some contemporaries will kind of somewhat try to put some books together, some theses together regarding discussing concerning hadith al-munkar, but the books of the ulama of qadim, of books of ilal, of Daraqutni, Abu Zur'a, and those books, they will somewhat point out, in general, some of these hadith are said to be of nakara or munkar. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, we have now concluded concerning, or discussed concerning those two now of hadith, which is shudhuz or shadh, and also munkar, as mentioned by the author here, Ibn Mulaqin rahimahullah. And Ibn Mulaqin, and that's concerning Ibn Mulaqin rahimahullah, that he mentioned regarding defining hadith munkar, that we didn't mention initially, that he mentioned, wal munkar huwa ma tafarrad bihi wahid غير متقن ولا مشهور بالحفظ. So he defined, Ibn Mulaqin rahimah, he defined hadith al-munkar by saying هو ما تفرد به, what have been narrated or singled out by a narrator, ad narrator by a person who himself غير متقن, that is not known to be precise, and also ولا مشهور بالحفظ, and also is not famous, renowned for precise in good memory. So that's concerning what Isati defined as hadith al-munkar, which is somewhat saying a person who is not a level of not that very precise regarding his memory, that he mentioned something on his own different from others. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, we'll now conclude regarding this session of our study in Ilm al-Hadith from the book At-Tadhkira لابن ملقن في علوم الحديث by Ibn Mulaqin rahimahullah. وبالله تعالى توفيقا وهادي إلى سبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.